There we go. So actually, I had a little typo I realized in my thing that I put in the Q&A, but so there was a request for the stop codon mnemonic from our previous session. So those are the stop codons. You are annoying, you go away, you are gone. And so that's right, because it's like stop codon, right? You're telling the thing to go away. Makes sense. A little bit of a mnemonic for you. All right, so welcome back to your exam review. We are starting round 2, which was technically round 4 of your actual full-length exam. So we're going to run through the PsychSoc section. Couple things to point out. I don't know if we have a lot of new folks. We have a lot of folks from the previous class, but remember, these are intended to not be a comprehensive review of the whole test. This is just to pick a couple different sections and pick a couple learning goals and show how, of course, we can use the exam itself to teach you a couple key takeaway and main points from the exam. So yeah, we'll go through PsychSoc, but yeah, we're not going to do the whole section. This is really just a way to give us an excuse to talk about a couple really cool things that we can discuss from the exam. So it should be pretty fun. Remember, as always, we got the same crew here. Kristen and Dom are running the Q&A in the bottom. We're also going to be chatting quite a bit. Let us know if you have any questions at all. In the meantime, let's talk about the learning goals. So first thing we're going to do today is anatomize. Anatomize? Is that the way you say that? Basically, it's anatomy, right? We're going to break down the PsychSoc experiments and how we got to show the component parts. Namely, we'll talk about who's doing the experiment, what's the goal of the experiment, what are the results of the experiment, and what we're measuring. And we'll talk about how this doesn't just apply to the PsychSoc section, it actually applies to the entirety of the MCAT in general. After that, we will do some analysis. We'll analyze some data, we'll look at some figures, we'll look at some tables, we'll look at some graphs. We'll show you how you can interpret the things that you need to interpret to really make sure that you get through these quickly and efficiently on test day. All right, so let's jump right in and get this thing started. So the questions you really want to ask yourself when you're reading and going through all this stuff is, first things first, ask who's doing the experiment. So now, the thing to be aware of, do you notice that there's certain themes where there's problems with the experiment, or there's errors in the experiment, or there's mistakes in the experiments? Do you notice anyone about certain people that do that? Yes, Sarah Beth. It's the students. Usually, and this is funny, but it's actually true if you look at the actual trends among old AAMC exams and how they structure it. There is a specific reason that they call the people doing the research either researchers, scientists, students, or whatever it might be. If they use the words like students, then they're more likely going to be making mistakes. If they call them researchers or scientists, they're less likely to make mistakes. Now, I know that sounds mean and silly, but oh my gosh, that's the way the AAMC does it. So we want you to be aware of certain trends so you cannot fall into the traps that they lay for you. So of course, also, you want to figure out what the goal of the experiment was. The common language to really identify this is just say, like this was performed in order to, or they're trying to determine. Look for the language. And we're going to do this a lot today to really break down experiments to see like how you can figure out what the goal was and what language they tend to use when they are really presenting the goal to you. This is one of the common ways. Other one is know what it is specifically that they're measuring. Interpret what's being measured in context of the experiment. So different types of experiments will have different types of measurements. Generally, let's do this. Is what's being measured, is that the dependent variable or the independent variable? What they're measuring. Is that the dependent variable or the independent variable? It's the dependent variable, exactly. So you'll often find terms like that show up in the PsychSoc section a lot in terms of experimental design. So of course, the independent variable is what we're manipulating, whereas the dependent variable is what we're actually analyzing. All right. And then find out if there's any mistakes that are being made. So look for potential sources of bias, look for potential just problems, miscalculations, but generally in the PsychSoc section, it will be sources of bias. It's a very common mistake that you'll actually see showing up quite a bit. All right, and if there are multiple experiments, try to figure out what the differences are between them, either different goals, different results, or what the main theme is in terms of differences between those two different experiments. All right, let's go right into this. So first passage from your PsychSoc section, of course, says right after that, research has conducted a series of experiments to determine, this is the language that we're looking for, to examine delayed gratification, specifically in children. So now there's one thing that I like to really kind of talk about. It's using keywords as we use road signs. So notice the keyword here that we're really looking for, the one that like kind of stood out. No, my pen tool is still not functional. That's okay. We'll have some fun with this instead. So the main thing is, notice that the keyword is to examine, right? That's the word we're saying, oh, here's the goal. But now the thing is, notice that we're not highlighting the to examine, we're highlighting delayed gratification. Because it's delayed, like the to examine is just directing us towards delayed gratification, which is the actual goal. So the metaphor is to use this in terms of stop signs and road signs when you're driving. So for example, if you're driving down the road and all of a sudden you see a stop sign, the stop sign is like the to examine. It's a keyword, it's a sign, it's telling you to do something. It is not the thing itself. If you see a stop sign, we don't stare at the stop sign. We see the stop sign and then instantly look to the intersection to see if there's an oncoming car. It's the exact same thing here. When you see the to examine, or you know, even in cars, like the however, the but, the therefore, the conclusion keywords, it's not the conclusion keywords that matter, it's what they're directing you towards. So same thing when you're driving, don't stare at the signs, stare at what the signs are telling you to look at. Oh man, I can do metaphors for days here, Bets. I can do metaphors for days. But yeah, that's one that we can all relate to, assuming that we do drive. Well, even if you don't drive, it still makes sense. All right, so that's our goal of the experiment. So goal, delayed gratification study, specifically on children. All right, so let's look at the experiment. 32 children, aged 4 to 6, presented with a piece of candy. Go figure. A child's told the researcher would be leaving the room, and if the kid could avoid eating the candy until they came back, they'd be given more candy. Of course, candy is a very good, like, what do you call it, activator, I guess you could say, for children. So approximately a third of the kids avoided eating the candy until the researchers returned. All right, so honestly, this is just the experiment. So all we're trying to do is we're relating delayed gratification to delaying the consumption of this candy. Gotcha. Awesome. That sounds good. All right, so that, of course, is what we're studying. It's the methods, right? So generally speaking, when you have an entire paragraph on just methods, we don't care as much about the methods as we care about the rest of the study. We care about the goal, we care about the results, right? Mostly, though, know where the methods are and what we're measuring, and then kind of just go quickly through the rest of the methods. So we're measuring whether they could avoid eating the candy or not. All right. So then it says, a longitudinal study was conducted on these kids who participated in experiment 1. It's found. It is found. That is, of course, what we care about. This is the road sign. It's the stop sign once again. And so here's what we determined, is that as adults, if they were able to delay their consumption of candy as kids, they're going to get divorced less, they're going to have lower body mass index, they're going to have lower rates of addiction and divorce, or they're going to have higher standardized test scores. I think that was put just in because this is an MCAT class, as well as better coping skills compared to their more impulsive peers. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that was put in for purpose, for a specific reason. Then it says, researchers posited a causal relationship between early life gratification and these outcomes. Now, let me know, do you notice anything here? There's something I want you to notice. There's a causal relationship. Between early life gratification and these outcomes of things like lower BMI. Sharifa, you got it. That's the big one. Correlation does not mean causation, right? We don't necessarily know. It's really, really hard to prove causal relationships, and I agree. It's like, it'd be hard, like, it's hard. What they're directly saying here is that because they ate less candy in childhood, it directly led them to have all these other factors. And I agree, and yeah, that's probably not going to be possible. That's way too, that's a pretty thin argument, I guess you could say. There is definitely correlation. That's something that be aware of, but do be aware that's a warning sign. That's a red flag, as you could say. Defining a causal relationship is exceptionally rare that you'll actually have a really legit causal relationship, especially when you're talking years and years later. That's just going to be impossible to do. All right, so here we go for experiment 2. So what's the point of experiment 2 now? Or what's this paragraph largely doing? So much to outline here. We're just going to get big picture. What's going on? Yeah, it's just another experiment, right? So here's an alternate experiment, and exactly if you got, it's the methods. So here's methods of experiment 2. It's a similar, but there's differences. We want to figure out what those differences are. And so what is the big difference? Well, I guess it is methodology. It's this art project thing, right? So it says before the delayed gratification candy test, the children were allowed to work on an art project, and we're given these 2 different conditions. So either the researcher would bring back the art supplies that was promised, or the researcher would return with nothing and say, sorry, they couldn't find them, or whatever that was. And then most important, what do you think the most important thing of everything is going to be? As always, in any experiment, always. The graph. The results, the data, however you'd like to describe it. You got it. That's what matters most, and so we do have these different results. So let's real quick do a little analysis. So notice, what are we actually comparing here? Explain what's actually going on in these different graphs. Cool. So there's two things. Notice you always want to analyze the x and the y-axis. X is easy. It's just whether it's condition 1. Remember, condition 1 was where they actually got the promised art supplies. Condition 2, where the researcher said they didn't have anything. And notice there's two graphs. One is the mean wait time. This is the percentage who waited 15 minutes. So now notice, in order to be in this graph at all, it means that they are not in this graph. So the kids who did basically, basically delayed their gratification, or they didn't delay gratification, they ate the candy. This is figuring out how long it took for them to actually eat the candy if they weren't going to wait. Whereas the second one here, these are the kids who just straight up waited. They never ate the candy, right? They waited at least 15 minutes till the researcher came back. Cool. And of course, there's some significant differences. And what do we learn in the chart? Significant, huge, big differences. And there's a lot of ways you could interpret this too. So I'm kind of curious to see how you say it. If you were in condition 1, there was a longer wait time, right? Not most of them, but yeah, actually most. More than 56% actually waited the whole 15 minutes, and the ones who did actually eat the candy, still they waited, at least 10 minutes before they ate the candy. So there's a lot more waiting. Why do you think that might be the case? What are some potential explanations why, if they were in condition 1, they waited, condition 2, they didn't bother waiting? Yeah, Emily, totally true. Reliability of the adults. If you are if an adult says, wait here, I'm going to bring you something, then comes back 15 minutes later and says, sorry, I don't have your art supplies, and then a couple minutes later they say, hey, don't eat this candy, I'll be back soon, you're not going to trust the person. Exactly true, Sharifa. So it's all about reliability of the experimenter. They're like, oh, this person isn't reliable, I'm just going to eat the candy, I don't care. So you got it. That's what I would infer as well. Of course, given data, we need to be very careful of the answer choices. We cannot draw too hard lines between causation and correlation, all that. But generally speaking, I totally agree with you. That's what it sounds like from the experiment. So we'll look at the answer choices and see how we can phrase that in a nice, moderate tone, nothing too extreme, nothing too definitive, right? We're very wary of overly definitive answer choices. All right, so here's an example outline. We were doing delayed gratification, experiment 1, methods, longitudinal extension, experiment 1. Then we have experiment 2 as well as the results. Notice that we're not writing down candy, we're not writing down art supplies, we're not writing down all the nitty-gritty details. We're giving a very bare bones, okay, where the experiments are, what the point of them is, and most importantly, where the results are. That's all we got to outline when we go through these experiments and passages. All right, so let's try it out. So when you're reading these, a couple of questions you want to ask is first, who's doing the experiment? So in this case, who's doing the experiment? Are students doing the experiment? Researchers. All right, so that's nothing too big there. So we got researchers doing the experiment. How about what's the goal? What was the goal of this experiment? Yeah, we're studying. It was at the very beginning. It said they did this in order to examine delayed gratification in children. And then, of course, we did that longitudinal study to look at them as adults as well. All right, cool. So the third one was, what are they measuring? Two things, right? Yeah, wait time as well as the percent who just waited the whole 15 minutes. So either time, if they did eat the candy, and if they didn't eat the candy, what percent actually waited. So percent waiting the entire time versus those who did eat, how long it took for them to eat the candy. Also, were there any mistakes made? Any issues? Any red flags? Yeah, a couple of the sample size is pretty small, that's true. But one thing to be aware of the sample size, I don't think they talked about generalizing the general population. Not sure. We'd have to double check to see. The causal relationship was the big one. So you know what I mean? Like, yeah, the assertion of the causal relationship, that was really big. I'm not sure if they specifically said if they want, like, the thing to be aware of with sample sizes, I'll kind of point this out right now, if the researchers aren't trying to generalize the study to greater population, like children in general, then you don't have to worry about the sample size. If they are trying to generalize, though, totally agree. You need to be very careful of that sample size because small sample sizes cannot be generalized to a larger population. I'm not sure what it said in the passage. I don't think they did. They might have, though, said that it was actually trying to generalize or not. So we'll find out. All right, so if there are multiple experiments, what are the differences between them? In this case, we talked about either experiment 2, doing the art before versus the art after, as well as just the delayed gratification study. And then, of course, we did the combination of the two as well, right? Doing experiment where you do the art, and then you do delayed gratification and see how it changes the results. So, but you got it. Yeah, the causal relationship was the big problem. That was the number one to identify. All right, let's do this thing. I'll just drop this right here. All right, so which of the following conclusions is suggested by the results of experiment 2 and not by experiment 1? So let's think about this for a second. The big thing in experiment 2 was that whole art delay. So something that's really just based in art and then doing delayed gratification, not delayed gratification in its own right. And you guys remember this one pretty good. Looking fantastic. Actually, you can see this broadcast that I just realized, but yeah, you guys are right. It is in fact answer choice B. Remember, the main differences was that if you have adults either follow through on a promise versus not follow through on a promise, it's changing the results of how students, or sorry, not students, the children, I guess, were performed on the research or performed in the experiment afterwards, I guess you could say, right? If the researchers followed through and actually brought them art supplies, they were a lot more likely to wait to eat the candy. Whereas if they didn't bring them the art supplies, they would just eat the candy regardless. So nice work, you guys got that for sure. All right, let us know. Q&A is wide open if you have any questions on that. Any traps here that you almost fell for? You know, we could always talk about any of the trap answers if there's ones that almost sucked you and if they did suck you when you were testing. If you guys don't have any questions on any of the other wrong answers, though, we can always just keep moving along. So just please feel free. Always ask questions at any time you want. All right. We'll clear this out now. Make sure these aren't being displayed as well. All right, so which of the following is the most serious potential flaw? We talked about this one quite a bit in the research conclusions. Specifically for the longitudinal component of experiment 1. So we already called out that the problem was that whole causation thing, right? So we made the possible mistake in assuming that there was a causal relationship in the study. So we're trying to find something that looks confounding, which wasn't a causal relationship. If we can introduce another variable that will disrupt us saying that there's this causal relationship between eating candy as a child and high test scores as an adult, what would it be? And we do have 100% of you once again. We rock this. So the only one that introduces a confounding variable here is answer choice C. They did not consider socioeconomic status of the participants as a potential confounding variable. Once again, we're looking for a confounding variable, something else that could explain what the relationship was that goes outside the scope of the experiment itself. And that's just an example of what a type of confounding variable. Exactly. And Dom's got a real breakdown for you. It changes both the independent and independent variable. You got it. Cool. And so notice we might have had, I think we changed it though. The reason that B is incorrect, and this proves that it definitely didn't say in the passage, we never tried to generalize this study to the rest of the population. If the author never tries to generalize the study to the rest of the population, then it's not going to be a serious flaw. So if the author did, yes, that could be a major flaw, could be major problems. So general themes to look out for, and I know that we often try to identify the sample size as an issue, and that is one of the big warning signs to be on the lookout to not worry about sample size if there is no generalizations happening. All right, same thing here. These are everyone's favorite kind of questions, I know. And what is it about this question that everyone loves so much? Yeah, sure, exactly. The least likely to be observed in children. So that means what's going to be true of 3 of these answer choices? Not just that it will be observed, but what does that mean? What types of things are we going to be looking for? Yeah, so what would we expect to be observed for students that, or sorry, these they were unable to delay gratification? The kids who ate the candy. Things such as I believe in the passage it specifically said be things like low test scores. Actually, we can bring up the whole passage here for you. Said specifically it's things such as we would expect them to not have high test scores. We'd not expect them to have a low body mass index, as well as higher rates of addiction, divorce, and just worse coping skills. So that's something that's basically high BMI, high addiction, high divorce rates, poor coping skills. The only one that seems to not be part of that at all, as 100% of you are saying in that answer choice, authoritative parenting styles with their children. That was not discussed at all, right? And of course, if it wasn't discussed at all, that makes it not going to be observed in the participants of the study that we're talking about. Cool. Nice work. All right, so that's just the general, like, notice, yes, I know you've done these passages before, you've seen them before. We're not doing it as a quiz again. It's mostly using it as a way to talk about the themes of experiments, the ways that they create wrong answers, the way they create right answers, and how you can apply this to future tests. That's what it's all about. All right, so do you guys remember this one, I'm guessing? The thrill-seeking behavior, subgroup of novelty seeking. Did anyone identify with this thrill-seeking behavior a little bit? It's kind of popular these days. No? Good. Helped you that way, I guess, right? Yeah, after the MCAT. There we go, Marissa, exactly. You got to be careful with that. I've had several students in the past, though, break their arm or wrist or something like that a couple of days before their MCAT and then weren't able to test because, you know, they were basically going out and having fun and skateboarding or whatever it was before the test, and then basically, yeah, womp womp, totally true. Be careful. All right, so thrill-seeking behavior, subgroup, it's been documented throughout written history, blah, 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 blah. It says one psychological theory. Exactly. We've got a psychological theory is that the participant's life, if the behavior is considered life-threatening or is perceived to be a greater value than those who are connected with the participant. So basically what that means is that if you're going to go skydiving, people are going to perceive you as cool, thus basically will make you more socially desirable. So something along the lines of thrill-seeking behavior is actually socially desirable by the people around you. Interesting. Cool, and it says when 2 people reverse introductions, the same results still favor the person engaging in dangerous behavior. So there seems to be some kind of definite relationship between people perceive thrill seekers as socially desirable. Cool. And then it says specific gene variants and brain chemistry. Okay, now we're going to get really specific here. Have been found to correlate with extreme behavior, particularly regarding dopamine receptors, and the one most cited is DRD4. Gene variant that's linked to a bunch of other psychological and neurological disorders. Cool. That's your variants. They've been found to correlate with extreme behavior. All right, and we said the most one we correlate to is DRH4. All right, so we got extreme behavior associated with this specific gene variant. Now I'm assuming we're going to do some kind of experiment to show a relationship between the gene variant and extreme or thrill-seeking behaviors. All right, so it says researchers studied 2 groups of thrill seekers. So we've got our 2 different variables. We've got those with the variant and those without. They work to isolate the social aspects of the behavior. So basically, this is the methodology. So we got the methodology where we have 3 different scales, right? A 3 sounds like it is, 1 represented relatively safe, 2 represented potentially supervised things that are dangerous, and the 3rd was excessively dangerous stuff like rock climbing without safety ropes and stuff like that. All right, so we're basically breaking down our behavior into 3 different groups. I want to be aware of that, right? So the researchers are defining what's either more extreme or less extreme, which is a potential issue you can have with the experiment. And then we're seeing how they prefer it either alone with other thrill seekers or in a mixed social environment that was both thrill seekers and non-thrill seekers. All right, so then we get our results, which of course is what matters most. Anything stand out here? So notice table 1, this is the one of the subjects with the gene variant. Table 2 is the ones without the gene variant. Just right off the bat, what kind of stands out? What do you notice here? Yep, that's definitely one of the low ones. So notice we've got a couple different trends kind of breaking it down. Notice the behavior rating is the less extreme. Notice that the mixed social starts to go up. Notice as it gets more extreme, it tends to increase in terms of the people being alone. That's with the DR4 gene, right? Whereas without the DR4 gene, notice it still has an increase with mixed social for the less risky stuff, but you don't really have that same relationship for alone that we saw before. And also now in this one, this is max, where here the top one's max. So there's definitely some different behavior between exactly people with and without the gene. I'd say actually both in mixed social for among thrill seekers and alone. Probably say the biggest one seems to be alone there because, man, these thrill seekers seems like they really just want to do crazy stuff by themselves and they don't care if people's around. Where in the other case, the normal people only really want to do the super extreme stuff if other thrill seekers are around them. So it definitely makes a pretty big difference there in the results. All right, so graph is just people favor those people that are seen as thrill seekers, extreme behavior with this gene. We got the experimental setup. We got two different groups. So notice we're varying both the types of activities, being more to less extreme, as well as people with and without that gene variant, seeing how they do differently depending on the social context and risk of the behavior. All right, so a couple of questions once again that you want to ask. Who's doing the experiment? So how about in this case? Once again, researchers, Emily, you got it. It's okay. Yeah, so that's the main thing is pay attention to if it is students or like something like that that stands out as being different. If it's just researchers or scientists, you don't really need to take note because like, okay, it's standard. Look for the non-standard people doing the experiment and then remember that. If it's standard, don't even worry about it. All right, so how about the gold experiment? What were they trying to do here? Cool, exactly. A couple things. So one, to see if there's a genetic relationship between thrill and non-thrill, as well as see how that varies depending on the whole social situation, I guess you could say, right? Yeah, exactly. With the people involved. There you go, Sarah Beth. Exactly true. Totally true. All right, so then what they were measuring, once again, it was percent of participation with different rates and activities with different Ranger ratings within both the people with and without the variant of that gene. That's basically just the charts that we have. All right, so any mistakes that you noticed here? Any red flags? No, not really. Nothing major, at least. Nothing, at least, compared to the previous experiments that we saw today. So nothing major, at least. All right, so the multiple experiments, what were the differences between them? There weren't multiple experiments here. We just had the thrill-seeking one, that was it. Yeah, honestly, Sharifa, that's what I would say, is that the danger ratings were subjective depending on the researchers. If there was one, that's what I would say, because it's like, how do you classify, like, rock climbing without a rope so much different than skydiving and all that, so that is subjective. I totally do agree with you. Maybe if they talked about, like, mortality rates within various things and then categorize them basically purely dependent on mortality rates, that would be a little bit more objective, but I do agree. We don't have any information supporting that, so I would assume it is subjective. That's totally true, Sharifa. All right, so let's try this out. Ooh, this is a good one. So notice we've got a psychologist analyzing data, determined that repeated actions of the non-genetic variant thrill seekers were based on positive responses from their peers. Sarah Beth, this is the thing. When it comes to psych and social, there is a bunch of certain behaviors and perspectives and just like the terms that you need to learn. The review notes, of course, are going to go through a lot of this, but a lot of the MSVs, those science videos, actually give you a lot of the real basics that you need between these two. So yeah, these are real important to study. Yeah, All right, we will soon. We will soon, Marissa. Actually, I'm not sure what the next class is. It might be a biochem one. The other people will know. Oh, it's learning, motivation, emotion. Nick's doing it. That'll be pretty cool. And then cars after that. So yeah, more psych stuff. So we have a lot more psych tonight. Sorry. All right. So now, with that stated, there are a couple of things you guys just need to know, and there's a couple. Yeah, check out the science videos that go through all the PsychSoc. It actually will break down a lot of this stuff for you, and it's easier than reading the books. A couple things to mention, though, is you do need to know the basics of these. So if we're talking about basically people, they're doing these things based on positive responses from peers. So they're changing their behavior depending on how, basically the feedback they get, you could say, from the environment around them. Reinforcement, Benjamin, exactly. That's what we're looking for, right? Reinforcement from the environment. Which one has the most to do with reinforcement? So the positive responses from peers. Rewards, you got it. Which of these kind of deals with reinforcement, rewards? Do you guys know? You can use the words if you're not sure. What just sounds the most like it? It is behaviorist. Certain behavior is being rewarded or not rewarded, which of course is what's going to show, the whole yeah, exactly. Rewards is behavior. You got it. Biological would make sense. It's something biologically driven. What about social cognitive perspective? Because I agree that one might sound closest because we're talking about the peers, right? It's a little bit different though. Do you guys know what? Yeah, I agree. A and C are the close ones here. There's a slight difference though. Social cognitive is it's more specific, you could say. Do you know what social cognitive is based on? Not so much behavior and rewards from people around you. It's more about, we'll see if anyone knows it. Yeah, you got it. More about beliefs. That'd be a way to say it. So it's more about beliefs or understanding of the world. So it's expectations of the world itself. It's a larger social cognitive, right? Not the specific, oh, this is what I want from this person. It's more of large beliefs of the world in general. So you got it, yeah. That's good. Yeah, totally. That makes sense. Cool. Perfect. There we go. Don's got the breakdown for you too about behaviorists versus the other ones too. Yeah, conditioning, like we said, rewards and all that stuff. Perfect. You got it. Cool. Cool. And then this wouldn't be trait. That'd be more of an individual, right? So they're looking for outside reward systems. So trait would be more of an internal thing. So you can knock that one out too. Cool. Check out the videos that go through all these different perspectives. We've got loads of stuff on your syllabus to help you learn all the psych stuff because I know a lot of us do not know the PsychSoc terms yet. And so it really does take a while. Cool. All right, 38. What do we got here? It says, which of the following would best test the validity? This is the kind of language we got to pay attention to. Best test validity in comparing the different ranks, activities among. Oh, so this is actually getting to specifically what we talked about, right? We knew that they were using subjective reasons to kind of identify what was more or less dangerous. Now we want to verify the validity of them actually comparing these different ranks of activities. Like skydiving versus rock climbing. What's considered more or less dangerous and how the researchers actually designed the study itself. So basically, for the plan here, we got to figure out how the researchers are actually assigning the different numbers for these different things. Why is 1 safer where 2 is more dangerous and 3 is the most dangerous? So what would be the best way to test the validity here? Across all 3 groups. Maybe. Cool. I think that's previous conversations. Yeah, I mean that's the main thing is what's going to be. Yeah, you could say what's common to everyone. What's common across all 3 group types. So notice that's actually a couple problems you can identify. And actually, no one's going for C anyways. But what was the expertise level of those attempting rock climbing? Well, that only addresses the 3rd option, right? We know this has to be true across all 3 different ranks of the 3 different social groups, right? So more kind of a common across the board. Notice we kind of have the same thing. What is the general definition, mortality rate, and frequencies of reckless driving? That's once again specific to one of the examples. And then do large groups tend to perceive dangerous behaviors as safer than they are? What do you think between A and D? To test the validity, straight up. What makes this rank 3? What's make this rank 2? Between A and D, which one looks better? B and C are too specific, right? That's only identifying a couple subsets within the groups. If you want to test the validity, you got to look at all 3 of them. Sarah Beth says D. So does Ms. Yeah, I agree. D would be the best one. So notice what we're doing here. What I purposely said before, I thought it would make sense to do an objective analysis of mortality rates when people are actually participating in the various activities. That would be another way to test the validity of it. Another one is, do activities with the higher ranks, are they just less appealing to non-participants? So are they, they're using the actual appealingness, or you could say participation across the board of the normal, like population group, and things that are rarer, things that are less appealing would be considered more dangerous across the normal, realm of things. I thought mortality would work well. This works too, but the main idea is it's looking at all three. That's the key. All right, nice work. All right, we'll go on to 39. So now we're getting real deep into the genes here. So we're looking for something, if true, would support the table in Theta 1. It's being consistent with the social desirability motivation for thrill seeking. All right, so first things first, Table 1. What do we know about Table 1? What's Table 1 specifically referring to? Look back. It's all right. Yeah, there we go, Emily. I brought it up because that's a good point. But yeah, you got it. It's those with the gene. So it was actually the patient, not the patients, the subjects that have this gene variant that they think is associated with undertaking extreme or dangerous behavior, right? Cool. All right, so now keep that in mind. So we are only looking at Table 1, which means we're just looking at the people with the gene variant and how it's basically going to be consistent with the social desirability for thrill seeking. So what supports in Table 1, so it's got to be based on those with the gene, consistent that thrill seeking is socially desirable. So we can actually eliminate a couple because of that. Yeah, and it's exactly true. Get rid of B. Because notice if we're looking at Table 1, it's not the non-group, it is the group, which actually eliminates another one too. What else does that get rid of? Nice, Marissa, you got D. So notice right off the bat, just knowing that we're analyzing Table 1, we can get rid of B and D because they're talking about the non-gene variant. It's got to be the gene variant. So now looking at just A and C, we want to try to find something that's specific to saying that they are doing this because it's socially desirable to do extreme things. So something along the lines of, like, I don't know, social desirability. They're doing their thrill seeking so they can be popular. Which of these looks closest to that? Yeah, across the board, C, exactly true. Notice it's relaying stories, sharing photos to demonstrate their identity to the non-thrill seekers as this, like, look at me, I'm a daredevil. Yay, stuff like that. I think that's what people do when they show their dangerous photos. They say yay and say that they're daredevils. Something along those lines. All right. All right, well, that's our first learning goal. So for the last half of class, I guess not half, the last 20 minutes of class or so, we're going to do some analysis of figures and tables. I know we already did some analysis of figures and tables. We're just going to further go through a little bit more and kind of break it down piece by piece. Talk about the given steps that you can use to really break this stuff down and look at it. All right, so we can do this by considering things such as what's the information being presented, what are the variables in the figure, look at the x, look at the y, know what your independent variable, knows what your dependent variable is. I know we've already discussed a bunch of that stuff today. And then try to find any patterns or correlations that are present between that information. So that's the key. You don't need to memorize the information. You don't need to analyze all of it. You just really want to find the big trends. Like, oh, if this goes up, that tends to go down. Or, oh, here's some real big discrepancies between the two different subject groups. Just big picture. Don't overanalyze until you have a question that demands you to overanalyze. That's really the key. All right. Oops. Sorry about that. All right. So you guys might have recognized that music. Maybe. Might have recognized that music. All right. So yeah, it's the elevator music, Ms. You remember the elevator music? That was from back before we did MCAT channel. We still use that music in a couple other classes, and I had another class open in a different window. So, all right. So let's go through passage 6. So perception, sensory stimuli. So well, I'll let you guys read this. How do you actually outline this? How would you outline this? Yeah, you got it. So Weber's law, perception, three ways, J and D. Perfect. Sensory stimuli, just noticeable difference. Do we all actually know about the just noticeable difference already? We like heard about this before this passage or read it in your books at all? Cool. Good to hear. All right, so one thing I just want to warn you guys, this stuff's actually pretty high yield. You got to know about just noticeable difference. It's actually something that's fairly common. One thing that I want you to be aware of, if you haven't yet done I think it's the sensory and stimuli is the name of the class. Do you guys, other teachers remember what it's called? I think it's sensation and perception. That's it. Sensation and perception. It's another channel class. We really get into J&D in that class. And so if you haven't checked out that one yet, please check out that other channel episode. It's pretty cool. And yeah, sensation and perception is the name of it. Nice. Thanks, Kristen. Cool. All right, so you guys are totally right. So we're talking about a quantitative study perception, just noticeable difference. Notice that just noticeable difference divided by S. S is the value of the stimulus, and K is a constant known as the Weber's fraction. So we're talking about Weber's law. And notice that the Weber fraction is actually different for different types of stimuli. So for electric shock, it's this low number. When you get to light intensity, it's a much bigger number. We talk about this a lot in terms of lifted weights. Notice that would be a 2% difference for lifted weights. We talk about it for sound, for light, for electrics, all this kind of stuff. Very common. All right, so now things get a little bit wonky. Notice we're most sensitive to differences in shock and less sensitive to differences in like light intensity or saltiness. All right, now where things get wonky, notice, however, in the case of sound, as you can see, Weber's law doesn't quite hold true. So we know there's going to be a breakdown when it comes to Weber's law and sound. So they call this thing a near miss, and then they give you this graph that's really to describe it. So now, let me know what's wrong with Weber's law here. So notice, look at your axes. Notice your x-axis is intensity in decibels. And this would be your, basically, Weber's law there. The noticeable differences between the two. Yeah, you got it, Sarah Beth. It's actually the other way around. It's opposite. So notice that for sound, for some reason, as you actually increase it, notice that the difference actually decreases. It's a reverse trend, right? It should be as you increase the stimulus, it increases the just noticeable difference. But this is actually saying that as you increase the stimulus, you are decreasing the just noticeable difference. Oh, and it's Weber's law. Oh, I didn't realize that. Dom's got some background. This guy's not named Weber. It's Weber. Weber. It's a German dude. There's so many German scientists that make us pronounce things funky. He is a German. It's true. I didn't know that. That's good to know. So do be aware of that. Mostly in OChem. There's so much German stuff in OChem that makes us pronounce things funny. It's weird. Like Zwitterion, right? Very strange. Or Wittig reactions, the other weird one too. There's lots of weird German stuff. All right, so German stuff aside, yeah. Tom says, since it's not a pronunciation test, it's good to be aware of. There we go. So we've got this inverse relationship for sound. That's what matters most. It's different than we would expect. And so there we go. Notice that actually Weber's fraction decreases as sound intensity increases, where everything else, the fraction, of course, should be constant. And then, of course, as you increase the stimulus, you should, of course, have an increase in just noticeable difference between the two. Cool. All right, so let's do some analysis. That's what this learning goal is all about. So let's dive in. All right, so now looking here, it says, unlike pure tones, the Weber fraction for a wideband noise is independent of sound intensity. What would the graph for this fraction of wideband noise look like? There is one incredibly important word in this question stem. I'm going to clear this out. Please throw your answers in if you know it, though. This is what the MCAT is all about. Sarah Beth, rock star. That is exactly what we're looking for. Notice it says that it is independent. Wideband noise is independent of the sound intensity, right? And so notice the intensity is the x-axis in all of these. And if we're going to try to find an independent relationship, what are we looking for? A line that is here's the thing. We have two different options. I agree it's not going to be A or C because people aren't going for, A or B because that's showing either opposite or linear relationships. But so yeah, you got two options. Either you can have this line here or you can have the horizontal line there. And Sharifa's getting to the point, it's going to be horizontal. Notice what a horizontal line shows is that irregardless of the sound intensity, right, whether it's 10 decibels, 50 decibels, 70 decibels, this stays the exact same. What would the problem with C be? That's actually, you gotta see if it doesn't make sense. That actually doesn't have a slope at all. That's indefined. That's like dividing by 0. Remember, there is no such a thing as graphing vertical lines because it's an undefined graph. It's not a real number. It's not imaginary, but you know what I mean. It's not real, undefinable. So it would mean that there is only any data at all at 15, and it's actually all things at 15. So it's rare you'll ever see anything graphed up and down because that of course means that you're dividing by 0. So you got it. So basically what we're saying is that the value of y is always the same regardless of the value of x, right? So there we go. All right. So it's got to be D. It's got to be D. So it should be a horizontal line. But nice job eliminating A and B right off the bat, but that is a good thing to be aware of. Horizontal lines are way more common. All right, we're knock out another passage or two here just to kind of show a couple examples, and then we'll call it quits and switch over to Nick for some more psychology, sociology, focusing on learning and memory and motivation. All right, so how about here? How could you outline this paragraph? This is also very high yield MCAT stuff. You got talking about cognitive dissonance, theory behind cognitive dissonance, pretty high yield, I gotta say, for just MCAT in general, so you do need to know this stuff. So we've got cognitive dissonance theory, and it says that there are 4 different possible ways that people basically reduce this internal tension, right? So cognitive dissonance, it's kind of like when outcomes and expectations don't really align. It creates this internal tension, and we make some kind of a change to make them more less dissonance happen between those 2 variables. So it's either lowering the importance of the dissonant option, magnifying the importance of the consonant option, changing your opinion, or of course adding new opinions to make you a consistent belief system. All right, so we try to test this theory. Goal. All right, so notice here we have. All right, nothing too much here. It's methodology, right? Experiments. We're making people do boring tasks. So we have 3 different conditions. Let's pay attention to those 3 conditions. That's what we're really going to pay attention to. All right, so first condition, you get $10. Second condition, they get $200. That's a pretty big difference. And then in control groups, students weren't paid and they weren't asked to talk to anybody about the task that they had just performed. Okay. So first condition, $10. Second condition, $200. Third condition, control group, no money. Now notice when you pay these people off, we're basically paying them to persuade them that they did something interesting, even though everyone's fully aware that what they did was very boring. This creates cognitive dissonance, right? They're trying to convince a stranger that they just did something awesome when they know in their heart that they just did a very, very boring task. But they're getting paid to lie, and so, of course, they're going to lie, but it is going to create some cognitive dissonance. So that's a big source of cognitive dissonance, is actually lying and things like that. So, yeah, exactly. You got it. This is getting to a good point here. All right, so various conditions. You got to persuade someone that it's not boring. You know what? The thing I would say is let's look at the data and find out. Because I know that they give you a graph in this. So if there is data, you got to trust the graph. All right, so the experiments that interviewed the subject, they asked them to rate attributes on a scale of 0 to 10, 10 being extremely negative opinion, 5 being neutral, and 10 being extremely positive. Ratings are shown in Figure 1. So we're rating. Here's what matters most. Right off the bat, glance at this table. What do you notice? Yeah, I agree, that $10 group. Wait, so remember, what did we say about these tasks again? The tasks were exceptionally boring, right? They're meant to be incredibly boring. Like, they're designing an experiment to take tasks boring. It's going to be probably really freaking boring if the goal of the experiment was to make it as boring as possible. Yet the people who were paid $10 are actually saying that it was pretty fun. Whereas the people who were paid $200 are like, meh, whatever. And that seems to be pretty true across the board. Those $10 people are pretty significantly happy with what they just did, even though they only made $10. Huh. Interesting. That's a little bit strange. So, I'm not going to get too into this. I'll let you guys answer the question first, but there's actually something really significant you can pull out of that data in terms of just cognitive dissonance in general and what it means in the real world and, the MCAT as well. All right, so, but there was our little outline. We built that together, right? So we said, of course, the $10 group had the most positive opinion of everything across the board. We're, of course, paying these people to lie to people and pretend like they just did something awesome when it was, in fact, quite boring. All right, so I'll clear this out. I'll let you guys, I don't know if you know the correct answer here, but put your answers into this poll, and then we can kind of really get into this and how it applies to cognitive dissonance for the rest of test day in general and really apply this across the board. We're really splitting these answers, actually. So now remember, these $10 group are saying that they just did an awesome task, even though it was, as we know, exceptionally boring. So if they're announcing that, yeah, this was actually really fun, you know, like I didn't really mind doing it, even though they only paid $10, and the answers are shifting, and I'll kind of show you where we're at, we do have most people going for B. And you know what? I agree. First and foremost, yes, they definitely had a lot of cognitive dissonance, right? They have the highest results across the board that they just did something super fun, even though if you look at the control group where they weren't pressured at all to do anything at all, they say across the board, no, this was really boring. This was, you know, enjoyable. No, it was not fun. So there is some definite cognitive dissonance here. They're basically telling themselves, they've convinced themselves that they just performed an enjoyable task, where in reality, they just did the most boring thing in the world. Now, why would it make sense that the $10 people, and this is going beyond the question itself, as you can see, most people are saying B, and it is B, but why would the $10 group have this more cognitive dissonance and convince themselves the tasks were actually fun while they weren't actually fun? Why would this be true for the $10 and not $200? This is kind of like in the guts of the social psychology behind it. Yeah, Ms., exactly true. The pay wasn't right. I want to hear what other people say too. There's a couple of ways you can phrase this. So here's the deal. Pretty much what happened is if you were paid $200 to lie to someone, and then they asked how you honestly felt, you'd be like, well, yeah, I only did that because you paid me $200. Clearly, I'm going to say it's a lot of fun. But in reality, that wasn't fun at all. You'll be very true with yourself about it. Whereas if someone gives you $10 to lie, you're saying, wait, I only got $10, but I just lied to this person for $10? Well, I'm not the kind of person who's going to lie for nothing, so it must have actually not been all that bad. It must have actually been okay, and you'll convince yourself that it wasn't that bad of a task because you're only being paid a little bit of money. Whereas if it's $200, whatever, you'll lie for $200. That's not that big of a deal. You don't have to convince yourself that it actually was a fun task. You guys kind of picking up what I'm putting down here? This is like a hallmark of cognitive dissonance in general. You know what I mean? It's like you're going to convince yourself it wasn't that bad because you're only being paid like $10 to do it. But $200, yeah, you're not going to lie to yourself. You're like, no, I did that for the money. Yeah, it's true. That's cognitive dissonance is abstract. It is an abstract concept. That's true. All right, but so do be aware. Check out. We do have classes on all of these social psychology things. There's the MSV videos you've got on your syllabus. We've also got actually, Nick will know if we get into cognitive dissonance in the next one. I don't believe we do. It's more about learning and motivation and emotion. It could get into dissonance, but I don't believe the class does. He'll let us know if it does. And so stick around. Nope, no dissonance at all. Thanks for letting me know. But we do have a lot of the science videos go through a bunch of that stuff. So if you have questions on specific resources, where to find them, hit us up in the Q&A. We can talk about it for days. All right, we're going to do another question, then we'll call it quits and let Nick take over. But it says, based on the ratings for the enjoyability of tasks in Figure 1, which processes were subjects using to reduce the cognitive dissonance? So now remember, we said there were 4 main ways that we actually reduced cognitive dissonance here. And so remember, we just kind of talked about this, right? So in reality, we said, well, they kind of convinced themselves that it was actually a fun task, even though it was boring, so they wouldn't admit to themselves that they're lying to people to be paid $10. And which of these 3 kind of lines are close to like saying, oh no, that task was actually pretty fun, even though it really was boring? Notice changing their opinion of the task and convincing themselves that it was in fact fun pretty much is a direct match with answer choice C, as Emily and Ms. are saying. You got it. So basically, they're going to change their opinion. They're going to say, no, that was actually pretty fun, even though in reality it was a very, very boring task. All right, so that was a little bit of background on cognitive dissonance. That was a background on a little bit of analysis of, pretty much the way that we analyze graphs, the way we analyze tables and passages and all that kind of stuff. But remember, all these test reviews, we don't go through every single question, but we leave the Q&A wide open, so if you have questions on anything at all, you can hit us up and let us know. All right, thanks for coming today. We're going to switch over to the new PsychSoc section with Nick Taylor. I hope you guys hang around, have a lot of fun with it. In the meantime, actually, Sarah Beth, hit us up in the Q&A. We can talk about the concordant versus discordant quite a bit. But in the meantime, I'm going to bounce and teach another class, and Nick is going to jump on. So I'll see you guys all soon. Stick around for the next episode of MCAT Channel.